What's something your parents believe that you don't?
There are messages that hit you like a slap in the face, not because of how loud they are, but because of how quiet they come. And when my phone buzzed at 7:43 in the morning on a gray Tuesday in early December, I had no reason to brace for impact. It was a text from Emily, my younger sister by 3 years, the same sister whose rent I helped cover last spring, whose kids call me Auntie D with sticky hands and big eyes, and who once sobbed in my arms after a miscarriage. The message read, "Dana, it'd be best if you didn't come this year. We want joy." That was it. No punctuation, no follow-up. As if I was a problem they needed to quietly solve before the holidays. As if I'd become the bad smell in a room they wanted to keep clean and cheerful for the season. I stared at the screen so long I missed my exit on I-94. Pulled over into a parking lot outside a tire shop, turned off the engine, and just sat there. That sentence spun around in my brain, digging deeper each time it looped. We want joy. What the hell was I then? The anti-joy? The Grinch? Had I done something, said something unforgivable? Or was this just the boiling point of years of quiet resentment they never voiced, but always held like ammunition? I thought back to last Christmas. The way Emily was frazzled, overwhelmed, trying to cook a meal with two toddlers hanging off her hip and her husband, Brian, half asleep on the couch. I showed up early, brought wine, peeled potatoes, ran to Walgreens when she forgot whipped cream, and still ended up watching everyone open gifts I had purchased because she was too busy to shop. Not once did she say thank you. But I didn't need it, or at least I told myself I didn't. That's what you do when you're the strong one, right? You clean up, carry on, and pretend it doesn't weigh you down. So maybe it wasn't just about Christmas. Maybe it was about every time I said what nobody else wanted to admit. When Mom started showing early signs of memory loss and everyone else chalked it up to being tired, I was the one who pushed her to get evaluated. When Brian lost his job and they were 3 months behind on car payments, I covered it, silently and through gritted teeth. When Emily needed help with health insurance, I added her to my own plan through work, swallowing the higher premium like it was just another tax for being the competent one in the family. I didn't respond to the message. I couldn't. Every part of me wanted to craft a reply, something cutting, something righteous. But I knew any answer I gave would be twisted into another example of me being too much. So I put the phone down, walked into work, smiled through a morning meeting, and at 12:06, I logged into my HR portal. I clicked the button that said Remove Dependent next to her name. It felt surgical, clean, and a little dirty in a way that thrilled me. There's a certain kind of power that comes from silence, the kind that says, I'm done playing nice. That night, I sat on my balcony, sipping a glass of wine that I didn't particularly enjoy, watching the city lights blink like quiet judgments. I thought about Emily's kids, sweet, chaotic, unaware. I wondered if she told them I wasn't coming. I wondered if she said anything at all, or if I'd just become another thing in their life that disappears without explanation. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just existed in this cold pocket of clarity where the truth was undeniable. They didn't want me, and for the first time, I wasn't going to beg to be wanted. 2 days passed without a word. No follow-up from Emily. No voicemail from Mom. Not even a passive-aggressive meme posted to the family group chat. That, more than anything, told me this wasn't a moment of poor judgment. This was planned, calculated, maybe even rehearsed. But I wasn't playing the part anymore. So on Friday, when I realized Brian's car, the one leased under my name because his credit was in the toilet, was still technically in my control, I logged into the account and disabled mobile access. It wouldn't start without the app. And I didn't even flinch when I clicked confirm. Let him call roadside assistance. Let him try to explain to a tow truck driver why his sister-in-law, not his wife, controlled the keys to his car. Let them both sit in that uncomfortable silence and think about what joy really costs. I was done being the unthanked backbone, the ghostwriter of their family script, the fixer who gets edited out of the holiday photos. I didn't reply to her text. I didn't give her the confrontation she probably expected. I gave her the one thing I'd never given before, distance. And I gave it cold. There is a strange kind of stillness that follows an emotional amputation, Not the dramatic kind that explodes in a screaming match or leaves broken plates and slammed doors in its wake, but the quiet, deliberate kind where you simply stop showing up, stop giving. Stop explaining yourself to people who never bothered to ask what it cost you to give so much in the first place. And in those first few days after I removed Emily from my health insurance and cut off access to the car her husband drove like it was his birthright, I felt that stillness settle into my bones like the first cold snap of winter, sharp, clarifying, and oddly comforting. At first, it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like subtraction, not of family, not of love, but of the exhausting expectation that I would always be the one to fix what nobody else wanted to admit was broken. I didn't wake up with a smirk or gloat as I sipped coffee in my apartment, which was now blessedly free of the usual pre-holiday panic texts asking if I could just pick up one more gift for the kids, or swing by the store because Mom forgot the potatoes again. Instead, I sat in the silence, watched the snow fall outside my window, and for the first time in years, allowed myself to consider that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the villain in this story, even if that's how they needed to paint me to keep their own hands clean. But even as I tried to enjoy this quiet reprieve, the familiar churn of guilt began to creep in around the edges, uninvited and persistent, like the draft that leaks through the window frame no matter how tightly you think you've sealed it. Guilt is a tricky beast, especially for women like me, the dependable ones, the eldest daughters, the ones who were taught not in words, but in expectations that love is proven through sacrifice and that stepping back is abandonment, not self-preservation. So when my phone lit up with a voicemail from my mother, her voice small, tentative, tinged with the performance of worry she's perfected over the years, I didn't listen to it right away. I let it sit there, a digital ghost in my inbox, waiting for acknowledgement I wasn't ready to give. 3 hours later, I deleted it without pressing play. And that's when it really began, not the retaliation, not the war, but something colder and more dangerous, the realization that I held the keys to every support system they had come to rely on, and that for the first time, I was no longer afraid to lock the doors. I opened my bank app, looked at the recurring transfers I'd set up over the years, Emily's share of the phone plan, the automatic payment for the kids' extracurriculars, the Netflix account they used more than I did, and without a trace of hesitation, I turned them all off. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. Because what they had never understood was that my generosity had never been infinite. It only looked that way because I never said no. And now I was saying it loud, without a single word. I didn't do it with glee. I didn't imagine their reactions. I didn't script a dramatic monologue in my head about how unfairly I'd been treated, although I could have, God knows the material was there. I simply removed myself, financially and emotionally, from a system that fed on my silence and depended on my compliance. And while a part of me knew it wouldn't go unnoticed for long, I also suspected they wouldn't come directly to me, not yet. Emily had always been the type to let others do the uncomfortable talking for her, which is why, when another voicemail came 2 days later, this time from my dad, I wasn't surprised in the slightest. His tone was different, more grounded, more careful, like a man walking across thin ice who doesn't yet know if it's cracking. He didn't ask me to call back. He didn't mention Christmas. He just said, "We love you, Dana. And we're confused." That was all. Not angry. Not defensive. Just confused. And in some twisted way, I appreciated that honesty more than any apology I never got from Emily. Still, I didn't respond. Because here's the thing people like my parents never quite learned. When you raise one child to be the family's emotional sponge, to absorb every tantrum, to soothe every wound, to fix every mess, and then you turn around and ask why she's dripping with resentment, you don't get to be confused when she finally wrings herself out and walks away. In the evenings, the silence grew heavier. Not painful, but undeniable. I had spent so many years running errands for everyone else's life that I didn't quite know what to do with all the free time I suddenly had. I started reading again, real books with actual pages instead of articles I skimmed on my phone between conference calls and grocery runs for my mother. I took baths instead of quick showers. I ate food I actually wanted, not what was convenient between obligations. And all the while I waited. Not because I needed them to come crawling back, but because I knew something was coming, not a text or an email or a screaming match, but a shift. A reckoning. It happened on a Thursday. I had just wrapped up a presentation at work, stepped into the break room to warm up my soup, and was halfway through stirring it when someone from the front desk popped in and said, "Dana, your parents are here to see you. They're in the lobby." I thought I'd misheard. I laughed, actually. "What?" I asked. But her face didn't match mine. It was serious. "They said it's important. They don't have an appointment." I put the spoon down. Slowly. Staring out the small window that faced the parking lot. I saw my mother's silver coat first. Then my father, pacing next to her like he wasn't sure whether to come in or flee. And in that moment, I felt something shift in my chest, not panic, not dread, but something sharper. A clean cut of knowing. Because when people show up uninvited, it's never to apologize. It's to demand an explanation for the choices you made after they broke your heart and expected you to quietly accept it. I didn't rush to greet them. I didn't wave. I let them wait. Because after all these years, they could afford to stand in the cold for a few minutes. And I was no longer in a hurry to warm them. There is something uniquely humiliating about being confronted in a space where you are usually in control, where your words are respected, your decisions carry weight, and your presence is measured not by emotional obligation but by competence, by logic. By the fact that for once in your life, you are not the daughter or the sister or the responsible one, but simply the person who gets things done. And yet, when I saw my parents sitting stiffly in the lobby of my office building, surrounded by young receptionists who glanced their way with polite confusion and just the faintest hint of discomfort, that hard-earned authority I wore so comfortably like a tailored blazer began to slip off my shoulders with the same slow unraveling I had felt all my life when the lines between family and identity started to blur. They didn't stand when I walked in, which I appreciated, because had they done so, had they approached me with arms open and apology in their eyes, I might have shattered right there on the glass tiles beneath our feet. Instead, they both remained seated, my mother gripping the strap of her handbag like a lifeline, and my father fidgeting with the zipper of his weather-worn coat, eyes darting toward the floor, the front desk, the ceiling, anywhere but me. And I, standing before them in my fitted slacks and structured wool coat, felt for a brief, sick moment like a child again, summoned into the living room for a family meeting where no one would say what they really meant, and everyone would leave feeling worse than when they started. "I have 10 minutes, I said, not because I was too busy, but because I needed to set the terms before they did. My voice was level, cool, and undeniably adult, but inside, I could already feel the bruises forming under the armor. We moved to a small conference room just off the lobby. Glass walls, a polished table, the kind of sterile modernity that makes personal conversations feel even more unbearable. My mother spoke first, of course, her voice thin but rehearsed, as if she had been repeating the lines in the car the whole way there. "We didn't know what else to do, honey. You've been ignoring us." I didn't answer right away, because I knew the silence would land heavier than any retort. My father chimed in next, in his usual measured way. "We just want to understand what's going on. Emily said you've been distant. And now Brian's saying the car doesn't work, and the kids are asking why they won't see you at Christmas." The way he said it, with that subtle suggestion that I was punishing the innocent, made me grit my teeth so tightly I had to unclench my jaw before speaking. "You're asking me to explain why I'm not playing a role I never volunteered for," I said, my voice low but steady, every word carefully chosen like stones placed on a scale. "You're asking why I've stopped carrying the weight, but not once are you asking why it was always mine to carry in the first place." My mother shook her head gently, not in disagreement, but in that vague maternal confusion she always weaponized when things got uncomfortable. "No one asked you to do anything, Dana. You just always did." And there it was, the lie wrapped in a compliment, the lifelong curse of the competent child who was never asked to help, but was always expected to rescue. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not malice, but a quiet kind of cowardice, the kind that lets problems fester as long as someone else is willing to clean up the mess. "You think that makes it better?" I asked, and the edge in my voice surprised even me. You think that absolves you, that you never had to say the words because you knew I'd do it anyway? You never asked, but you always expected. And now that I've stopped, you're what, shocked? Hurt. My father leaned forward, elbows on the table, his hands clasped tightly as if in prayer. Emily said you were upset about the Christmas message. She didn't mean it to be cruel. She's been under a lot of stress. Oh, has she? I interrupted, the sarcasm slicing through the air before I could reel it back. Has it been hard being surrounded by people who support her, while she quietly votes her sister off the family island for being a little too inconvenient? The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted the bitterness in them, but not the truth they carried. Because that's what it felt like, a rejection not of an invitation, but of my presence, my personhood, the version of me that doesn't decorate herself with artificial joy just to match the damn tree. There was a long pause then, the kind that stretches out like an unanswered question, one that hovers in the air and dares you to breathe first. My mother finally sighed, a long, tired exhale that spoke more of guilt than understanding. Emily's been having some health issues, she said softly. She didn't want to make a big deal of it. She thought if you came, it would shift the focus. I stared at her, unable to comprehend how she could say that out loud and not hear the poison inside it. So she lied by omission and excluded me so she could preserve her image? I asked. You don't see how manipulative that is? My mother flinched, just barely, but she didn't argue. Instead, she looked at my father, who now looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, shoulders hunched, face weary, as though the weight of all the years he had ignored the cracks in our family finally decided to collapse all at once. We're not here to take sides, he said after a beat. We're here because we're worried. About all of you. I stood, my chair scraping softly against the hardwood floor. I couldn't sit there any longer, not in that glass fishbowl of a room with their half-truths and implied guilt swirling around me like secondhand smoke. Worry less about me and more about the mess you've let fester for years, I said. You think this all started with a Christmas message? No. That was just the trigger. This has been a long time coming. They stood too, hesitantly, unsure of whether to follow me or let me go. My mother opened her mouth to say something, maybe one last appeal, maybe another veiled plea for harmony, but I held up a hand, just enough to stop her. This conversation is over, I said. You've had years to listen. You chose silence. Now it's my turn. I walked out of that room and back into the world where I had authority, where my words carried weight not because of blood, but because of merit, and for the first time, I felt no guilt about leaving them behind, blinking in confusion, still trying to figure out how the daughter they had depended on turned into someone who no longer needed to be needed. But later that night, when I returned home and found a torn, crumpled envelope stuffed under my apartment door, no stamp, no return address, just my name scrawled in my niece's handwriting with backward letters and smudged marker. I felt something catch in my throat, something fragile and aching and too human to ignore. Inside was a drawing. Me, Emily, the kids, standing under a tree. All smiling. All together. In the bottom corner, a lopsided heart and the words, "We miss you, Auntie D." And suddenly, the stillness didn't feel like peace anymore. It felt like a punishment. Not for them. For me. It's an odd thing, the way anger settles into your bones, not like fire, but like ice, slow, creeping, and entirely without warmth, so that by the time you recognize the chill inside you, it's already hardened into something permanent. Something that won't melt just because you're tired of feeling cold. That's how I felt in the days after my parents left my office, not triumphant, not vindicated, not even relieved, but suspended in a kind of emotional deep freeze, where everything looked the same from the outside, but tasted different in my mouth. Like milk that's just about to turn, but hasn't soured quite enough to throw away. I returned to my routines with the sort of mechanical precision I'd always leaned on in times of emotional upheaval, early morning meetings, emails sorted by priority, frozen dinners eaten standing up at the counter, and yet, beneath that surface calm, a storm was building in a place I hadn't checked in years, not because I didn't know it existed, but because I'd spent so long pretending it didn't matter. But something shifted the moment I saw the drawing. I had stared at it for so long the paper began to soften under my fingers, the crayon lines smudging into clouds of red and green where my thumb pressed too hard, a happy little scene, drawn by a child who didn't know about the cracks in the floor she stood on, who only knew that her aunt used to be there and now she wasn't, and no one had explained why. And I thought, as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling while the city hummed outside my window, about the stories families tell themselves, the myths we build around love and loyalty, around who sacrificed what and who deserves forgiveness, as if blood alone can whitewash over years of hurt and expectation. That morning, something pulled me toward Emily's social media, a space I usually avoided because it reeked of performance and pretense, all curated smiles and neatly filtered snapshots of domestic perfection. And there it was, a full album titled Holiday Magic, posted just 2 days after I'd been unofficially uninvited from the Christmas I'd helped fund and organize for years. The photos were everything they were supposed to be: children in matching pajamas, Brian stringing lights on the porch with his usual tired grin, Emily in a red sweater holding a mug that almost certainly had wine in it, despite the cinnamon stick poking out the top. In one picture, the whole family sat around the dinner table, heads bowed in mock prayer, food perfectly arranged for the camera, but it wasn't the orchestrated normalcy that caught my eye. It was the empty chair, right at the corner of the table, decorated with a tiny pine wreath hung over the back, a candle placed in front of it, as if someone was supposed to sit there, as if someone was missed or mourned, or perhaps just erased, and then vaguely commemorated in a way that could be explained a dozen different ways, depending on who was asking. And I stared at that image, my hand trembling slightly as I enlarged it, scanned every detail, every smirking face, and every perfect angle, and felt something I hadn't felt since I was 17, and found out Emily had thrown a birthday party without inviting me, a betrayal that wasn't loud, but surgical in its precision. Because this image was not just a family having Christmas without me. This was a statement. This was pageantry. This was Emily taking the absence she orchestrated and spinning it into a performance of grief, one where she got to be the strong one who carried on, the resilient mother who maintained joy despite the loss of her difficult sister. And I knew, with a certainty that made my stomach turn, that she had not only excluded me, but had gone so far as to write a version of events where she was the victim. That was the moment I called Nicole, our cousin on my dad's side, the one who lives in Denver now but still talks to everyone, still makes it to every wedding, funeral, and baby shower with the forced cheer of someone who needs to be liked more than she needs to be honest. I didn't call to gossip. I called because I needed confirmation, because the truth was starting to unspool inside me, and I couldn't trust it without another voice to anchor it. "Yeah, I was actually wondering what happened," Nicole said after a brief pause. "Emily told me you were having a rough time. Said you needed space. Something about burnout? Or maybe we're dealing with depression. She made it sound like you asked to stay away." That sentence, that quiet little dagger wrapped in sugar, took the breath from my lungs faster than a punch to the gut. It was so calculated, so familiar, so perfectly Emily. Not an outright lie, no, never that. But a careful reshaping of the truth into something soft and palatable, something that made her look gracious and made me look unstable. And for the first time, I understood just how deep her manipulations had gone, how many people were walking around thinking I had exiled myself, that I had stepped back out of personal struggle. Not because I was shoved aside like a piece of inconvenient furniture. I didn't tell Nicole the truth. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there in the middle of my apartment with the kind of stillness that feels like drowning. I thought about all the years I had protected Emily, even from herself, covered for her mistakes, paid off her debts, told white lies on her behalf to keep the peace, and now she was using my silence as proof of a narrative I had no part in writing. That night, I opened my laptop and started typing an email to Emily. At first, I thought I would just let it all out, every slight, every memory, every unspoken betrayal. But the more I wrote, the less satisfying it became. There's no justice in writing the truth to someone who's already decided they won't hear it. So I saved it in drafts. Didn't even reread it. Just let it sit there like a letter to a god I no longer believed in. What I did instead was far quieter and far more final. I composed an email to my HR department. I didn't need to say much, just that I wanted to remove all secondary drivers from the company-leased vehicle, that it was for legal and liability reasons, that I would be returning the car to company custody within the next month. They approved it immediately. No questions asked. I scheduled the tow for the following Monday. I didn't notify Brian. I didn't warn Emily. I let the wheels of consequence turn without interference. Because sometimes, the most honest form of communication is the silence that follows a storm, the kind that isn't cruel, but clarifying. On Sunday night, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I ignored it. Then came a text. Just one line. "Did you tell Brian he's losing the car?" I stared at it for a long moment, the edges of my mouth curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. And I typed back, very slowly, with the kind of calm that comes only when you've finally stopped begging people to see you as good. "No, Emily. I told the leasing company. They're repossessing it on Monday." Then I turned off my phone, poured myself a drink, and let the silence wrap around me like armor, not because I had one, but because I had finally stopped playing a game where I was the only one following the rules. There are moments in life when the air feels too still, too rehearsed, as if the world has paused just long enough to prepare you for something you never asked to receive, a truth so sharp and uninvited that even its arrival feels like an act of cruelty. Not because you didn't deserve honesty, but because of how long it was withheld and the damage done in the silence. When Emily finally showed up at my door, 4 days after the car had been towed from Brian's office parking lot, with him reportedly watching helplessly as the vehicle was latched and lifted like a prize he didn't even know was being taken, I expected tears. Perhaps rage, maybe even one of her famous controlled breakdowns where her voice trembled just enough to make you feel like a monster for defending yourself. But what I got instead was something I hadn't seen from her in over a decade. Rawness, stripped of pretense, a vulnerability so real it almost knocked the wind out of me. She looked smaller than I remembered, not in stature but in spirit, as if something inside her had cracked and the pieces had settled unevenly. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun that didn't hide the exhaustion painted across her face, and her usual carefully applied makeup had been replaced by a bare, honest pallor that made her look both older and younger at once. Like the version of her I knew before we all learned how to pretend in front of each other. She didn't ask to come in. She just stood there, arms crossed like she was hugging herself, and said the words I least expected to hear. "I need to tell you something, and I'm not here to win." I stepped aside without speaking. Not because I forgave her, not because I was ready to listen, but because part of me, the part I'd tried so hard to silence, still ached for answers. Still needed to understand what could possibly justify the casual cruelty of being excluded from a holiday I had helped hold together year after year. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I had eaten countless meals alone in the past weeks, pretending the isolation was peace and not punishment, and for several long moments we said nothing. The silence between us thick with years of unspoken resentment and tangled sisterhood. Then, slowly, carefully, as if choosing each word was its own act of courage, Emily began to speak, not with the defensive sarcasm she often used when cornered, but with the shaky humility of someone who had finally run out of places to hide. She told me, in halting phrases, that she had been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer in late October, right before Halloween, and that she hadn't told anyone outside her immediate household because, as she put it, "I didn't want to be pitted during the holidays. I didn't want to become the center of a story I couldn't control." At first, I didn't know how to respond. My body sat frozen, locked in the posture of someone who's been bracing for a punch, but receives a confession instead. I looked at her face, searching for signs of exaggeration, for some indication that this, too, was a manipulation designed to shift blame or absolve her. But what I saw instead was something far more dangerous. The truth, in all its messy, inconvenient complexity. She hadn't excluded me because she hated me or because I made things harder. She had excluded me because she couldn't bear to be fully seen by the one person who had always seen through her, because the illusion of joy was easier to maintain when I wasn't there to ask real questions or look at her with eyes that didn't buy the performance. I didn't want you to come and feel sorry for me, she said quietly, her voice almost breaking. And I didn't want to be angry at you for seeing what I couldn't hide. I know it sounds twisted, but pushing you away was the only way I knew how to keep things normal. I told myself I was protecting the kids, protecting the mood, but really, I was just trying to protect myself. There was a long pause, not awkward, but heavy, the kind that feels like a hallway with no doors, just an endless stretch of understanding you're not sure you want to reach. And in that pause, my mind raced through every small cruelty of the past few months, every jab, every silence, every passive-aggressive move that now took on a different shape, not softer, but more explainable. And still, a part of me resisted the impulse to let go, not out of stubbornness, but out of survival, because while her pain might explain her actions, it didn't erase the damage they caused, the isolation, the public humiliation, the deliberate reshaping of the story so that I looked like the unstable one retreating from the world. I asked her one question, finally, because it had burned in me since Nicole's call, since the moment I realized the version of me she had been quietly feeding to the rest of the family. Why didn't you just tell them the truth? I asked, my voice flat, steady, but trembling beneath. Why lie about me needing space? Why not say you were the one who needed space? She looked down, twisting her hands in her lap, and said, because if I said that, they'd ask why. And if they knew why, they'd worry. And if they worried, I'd have to perform strength again, every single day. I didn't have it in me. But with you, I knew you'd see through it. And I didn't want to be that exposed. And that somehow hurt more than all the other betrayals combined, not because she didn't trust me, but because she trusted me so completely that my presence scared her more than her illness did. I didn't cry, not then. The tears would come later, quietly and alone, in the dark of my apartment when the echoes of that conversation would replay in my mind like a film with no resolution. In the moment, I simply nodded, not in agreement, but in resignation, because no matter how much we try to outrun it, family always comes back to haunt us in the form of choices we made for love and paid for in silence. Before she left, she reached into her bag and handed me a small envelope, not a gift, not a letter, just a copy of her treatment schedule and a note scribbled in the corner that read, "Only if you want to be there." She didn't wait for a reply. She just walked out, leaving the door open behind her like a question with no right answer. Days passed, and I went about my life, quieter, heavier, but still moving. I spoke to my HR department and told them to leave the changes in place. I didn't re-add her to the insurance. I didn't reverse the car access. I didn't make any grand gesture to erase the boundaries I had spent so long fortifying. But I did show up to her first appointment, sat in the waiting room with a book I didn't read, and when she walked out, pale and shaking, I stood up and walked beside her without saying a word. Because love, I'm learning, isn't about saving people from themselves. It's about choosing to stand beside them, even after they've pushed you away, even after they've tried to write you out of the story, not because they deserve it, but because sometimes we need to be reminded that our presence, even in pain, is a kind of grace. She said she wanted joy. What she really meant was peace. What she really feared was being known in the fullness of her fear and fragility. And I, in all my cold resolve, gave her honesty. Maybe that's close enough. Or maybe it's the only thing we ever truly owed each other.